So, Health Emotion is really pleased to have Dr. Francis Flint with us today. Francis, when did you become a certified athletic therapist? And please share with us why you chose to pursue this profession.
It's kind of interesting because I'm probably the oldest person to become certified as an athletic therapist because it was late in my careers, I guess I could say. It was 1996, and that's not that long ago. However, I had a career before that as a coach.
How did you get into coaching and then why coaching led you to athletic therapy?
I had a role model in high school who was a coach, and I thought, this is for me. I have to be a coach, and basketball, of course. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. Uh, but I think probably my own background with injuries, and then seeing athletes get hurt and perhaps not get the treatment that they deserved. And that's what led me towards sports medicine and athletic therapy.
You said basketball. Was basketball your sport?
Yes, absolutely. I was a swimmer, but basketball was, I mean, it was a team. And I guess that's probably the real hype, was that it was a team sport.
So you went from coaching into athletic therapy. Where did you study?
I left the country.
Okay.
I was undergraduate at the University of Toronto. And then I was working in camping, which is another hat that changed back and forth. And the person who, I knew I was going back to school, but I didn't know where. And the person who was hired to replace me, she had just come from the University of Oregon. And I thought, okay, that's for me. I'm going out to Oregon, wherever that is. It was a terrific decision. I loved it out there.
So out there, you were actually studying athletic trainer.
Yes, I worked and did the sports medicine stream and worked as an athletic trainer with their program.
Did you achieve the ATC designation?
Yes, I did. But actually, it was the second time that I went back to the University of Oregon, sort of moving things around. I came back from Oregon with a master's degree and went into coaching at York University and did about 9 or 10 years of coaching and teaching there, and decided still that wasn't enough. I had to go back to school again. And of course, Oregon was my choice because it was just a fabulous place.
So, and your master's was in?
Uh, Two areas, outdoor education and sports medicine.
What were your early days as both an athletic trainer and an athletic therapist like? Do you have any favorite memories or stories?
My first days back at York as an athletic therapist were very interesting. I was working with Ed Nolkowski, who was the head athletic therapist. And of course, he was covering football. And so I got men's rugby, the number one team and the seconds team. And of course, rugby is a unique sport, I guess we could say. Football players will come off the field if they're hurt. Rugby players won't. And so you almost have to pry them off the field if you feel that they're injured. And I worked with a coach who used to carry a bullet in his pocket. And if one of the players I was treating, what he wanted him back on the field, he would come over with the bullet and he would say, okay, if you're hurt badly enough, shoot yourself with this bullet. If you're not, put it in your teeth, bite it, and get back on the field.
So, and that leads me to my other question, because from everything I've seen, and particularly to speaking to some of the early pioneers, female pioneers like Marcia Franklin and Anne Hartley and others, athletic therapy was initially very male dominated. And I'm wondering if you had any other stories about, being, one of the early females or being the only female, particularly in not just a male dominated profession, but male dominated sports like rugby at that time.
Because I didn't care about any of that male dominated stuff. we were going to treat the athlete. And there's something that's been in my mind that I think that we should promote as athletic therapists, and that is that we are the voice of reason. And on the field, the voice of reason is always biased towards the athlete. And I don't care if it's a male coach, a male athlete, or anyone, that athlete gets the voice of reason coming from the athletic therapist.
It's so great to hear you say that, Francis, because that's one of the reasons the OATA, Athletic Therapy Ontario, was so persistent, actually, in having athletic therapists take on the role of safe sport ambassadors, because you do have that, not just the role of reason, but also that advocacy for the athlete and making sure there is a safe environment, right?
Yes, it's interesting when we see the balance of males and females and how sport has changed over the years. And a lot of the, and I shouldn't say this, but a lot of the older trainers and older therapists perhaps had a different experience. They were expected to get the player ready to go back and play, and that the game was the most important thing, not necessarily the athlete. And it's changed so dramatically. And one of the things I saw at York University with with students coming into our program was that there was a shift. At the beginning, there were a lot of males. And now I think if we see there's more than a balance of females becoming athletic therapists. But there was early on, there was a very interesting situation. We had a young man who had applied for the program, and I could see that he was having difficulty with our interview process and perhaps the group of people who were around. So I had him come into the interview rooms, and with me was Andrea Prier, who was at that time a new athletic therapist, and she was helping with the interview process. And I asked him a couple of questions, and what came across very strongly was that he didn't think that females should be doing anything with males in sport. Absolutely not. So I asked him, well, how would you feel if you were a co-head athletic therapist with, say, Andrea Prier here, who is a new athletic therapist? And he looked at her and he looked at me and he said, that would not happen. Was so very strong that he would not work with females. And we have to be ready to work with everyone, anyone. It doesn't matter who they are. If they're involved in sport and we're working with them, then we do just that. We work with them.
To go back to Oregon for a moment, there are not many ATs even today, Francis, who have master's degrees, never mind a PhD. So would you know for sure, but are you the first female athletic therapist in Ontario who earned a doctorate?
When I came back from Oregon, I looked around at people who had athletic therapists who had PhDs, and I think I was the only female. I think there were 12 of us in total, and all males. And they had predominantly gone to the States, as I did, to get their PhD and athletic trainer first, and then athletic therapist. And of course, they were the ones who developed athletic therapy here in Ontario first, and then across the country. So I think I was the first, but now it's wonderful to see how many women have a PhD and athletic therapists, and how many men as well, how the level has gone up. And now we're looking at hiring people who master's degree is the main thing that they have to have, along with athletic therapy.
How did you move on to become the first head of the athletic therapy program at York?
When I came back from Oregon in 2008, that was the first proposal. I put it forward in the fall of 2008. 3 years later, and we went ahead. The students were waiting. Ed had passed away at that time. I was the only person who was a PhD and an athletic therapist in the faculty. So I got the job.
You've also known many of the founders of athletic therapy in the province, people like Freddie Dunbar, Jamie Laws, Barry Bartlett, Tim Page, all those names. What made those early days just so full of hope and camaraderie?
Working with the established athletic therapists, they accepted me, and strangely enough, because they didn't know me, the only thing that they knew about me was that I was a previous coach, because they had been on the sidelines of opposing teams at times when I was coaching. And so they sort of sat back and said, well, where's her background? Where's her in the mud with the rest of us? They accepted me.
Do you think it's time for statutory regulation and a defined scope of practice and title protection for the profession?
It's interesting, the position we're now in Canada. In order to be respected by the sports medicine community and the medical community in its entirety, but by coaches, by universities, by sport teams, we must be regulated through the healthcare system of each province, so that we are recognized. And one of the problems I think that we have is that we're small enough that, in a sense, people want to hold on to what they've got and not lose some control of that, and maybe be the first to do this and the first to do that. And it's absolutely essential for us moving ahead, even using the NHEA model of having our organization, and then separate from that, having our certification and accreditation. But they need to be separate.
Speaking of models, were you not one of the first ATs to become a Red Cross certified first responder instructor?
A funny story about the first responder. A little bit of the first responder in the States. They were a bit ahead of us in Canada. And I heard via the grapevine that they were going to have instructors for first responder, and paramedics can apply. And I thought, wait a minute, why just paramedics? And so I called a friend of mine who was actually in charge of the program, and I asked her, we're athletic therapists. We've got huge amount of education and practice in first responder. That's what we do. Why aren't we being included along with paramedics? And she said, whoa, wow, that's really a difficult situation. They only want paramedics. And I said, well, would you give me a chance? And she said, okay. So I went, and of course there were 11 men and paramedics and one female certified athletic therapist. And they're all looking at me thinking, what the heck is this? And so they did a little test. We had certain skills that we all had to have in order to even take the course. And so I was asked to apply oxygen, and one of the paramedics was trying to be helpful, and he said, oh, here's the equipment and everything. And I said, oh, thank you, but I want to check first to make sure that the regulator is attached properly. And so I checked it, and it was loose. And so I tightened it up, and as I was going back to apply the regulator, all the equipment to the athlete, I noticed the two looked at them, and the instructor, trainer, and my friend looked at each other and went like this. And I thought, oh, okay, I think I've passed. And so I became the first certified athletic therapist to become an instructor in Canadian Red Cross first responder. But we moved ahead quickly, very quickly.
To which, again, another first, Francis, you were the driving force in the creation of AT 911, the critical incident stress management program. What gave you that idea about CISM? Why do you think that's been a great benefit for the profession?
When it comes to handling situations where there's the potential for sudden death, spinal cord injury, those kinds of things, as first responders, we are seeing that. We're managing it. And then we pass them along in the train of medical care. But there we're left standing thinking about what has happened to this person and did we do the right thing? And what really happened was one of our certified athletic therapists managed a spinal cord injury out west. And he called around to some of his friends, and he was really in mental trauma because he was worried that what he had done had caused more trauma to the athlete. And he was calling around to all kinds of people, and he called me and he said, Frances, I don't know who to talk with. I can't sleep. I'm upset. I'm having difficulty working. What do I do? And we talked for a long time. And finally, just accidentally, I said something that hit home. I said to him, the athlete was injured before you arrived. You did nothing wrong. The injury was caused before you got to him. And that made him sit back and say, okay, I did nothing wrong. I did everything correct for that athlete. And then I passed them along. And that made him at least be able to come to terms with the injury.
In many respects, Francis, it's a best practice. You've created best practice. I know the Provincial Association here in Ontario has long acknowledged your leadership in promoting evidence-based practice. What more do you think could and should be done to encourage evidence-based practice within the profession?
It has to happen right now in order to advance research and best practice in athletic therapy is doing our own research. If you do a review of literature, you'll see lots of things that say athletic trainers do this, athletic trainers study that, PTs study this, RMTs study that, and very little athletic therapy studies this or studies that. And we need our masters and PhD people to do research and in what we do as athletic therapists and get the title of athletic therapy out there so that people recognize that we do have a foundation of research that gives us a credential in getting some respect from other colleagues and professions. And we need to do that right now.
That's a great call to action, Francis. What is your hope for the future of athletic therapy?
Every sport that is played, every institution that has teams and athletes will have certified athletic therapists on the sidelines. And what I want to see right now is high schools across the country replicate what's happening in the States, and that is start up programs with a certified athletic therapist on staff to work with injured athletes, but also to work with the high school students and form a first aid club. And those first aid students would work with the certified athletic therapists on the teams in high school and then move on to a career in athletic therapy at any institution across the country because they would all have programs in athletic therapy. That's what I want to be remembered for, helping people get what they wanted in their careers.
It's a wonderful thought. Thank you so much for being part of this 50th anniversary. It was 1973 when the Ontario Sport Therapists Association was first established. There are many who would say that you did have a big role in helping them create dreams and then fulfill them for themselves within athletic therapy and sport medicine. So thank you so much.